You may not be possessed by evil itself, but you're possessed by a love of many things, distraction, pleasure, the list goes on. I would say the devil doesn't have to use his demons. He's got plenty of distractions in this world that we run to and grab onto and latch onto and get the same result. We continue our journey through the Gospel of Luke, arriving today in Luke chapter 8 with probably a familiar story to you, but it's a story that is getting a little repetitive in the Gospel of Luke because it's a story that we've seen again and again. It's a question that is asked for multiple times at this point, and we're going to continue to see it because here in the beginning stages of the Gospel, Luke is trying to tell us and give us insight into who Jesus is. That's the question that we're going to see asked again today. Who is this? Who are we dealing with? And though we are 8 chapters into the book, the disciples are still trying to figure out, who is this man? What are we going to do with him? And we're going to see today 2 stunningly clear pictures of who he is. And the challenge that comes to the apostles, that comes to us, that comes to anybody who reads these stories, really, the challenge is, how will we respond to these clear pictures of who Jesus is? Because the 2 pictures give us the same reality. It is the same confession that we've sung about this morning, that we see across church history, that we see across the scriptures. The question is, or the confession is, I should say, is He is Lord. That's the picture that we see in both of these stories today. The confession of the saints for all time, that He is Lord. That's what Luke is Luke is making incredibly clear in this text, that only Jesus is Lord and only Jesus can do and act in the way that He does in this text. So let's look starting in verse 22 of Luke chapter 8. We'll read some of these verses together. So it says, one day He got into a boat with His disciples and He said to them, "Let us go across to the other side of the lake." And so they set out. And as they sailed, He fell asleep. And a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filled with water and were in danger. And they went and woke Him, saying, "Master, Master, we are perishing." And He awoke and rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased, and there was a calm. And He said to them, "Where is your faith?" And they were afraid, and they marveled, saying to one another, "Who then is this? Who is this man, that He commands even winds and water, and they obey Him?" The first picture that we see Luke painting here is that He is the Lord over all of creation. The Sea of Galilee is somewhat unique in that it sits well below sea level, but at the same time, it's surrounded by mountains on virtually all sides. And on the west, you have kind of a couple of big channels in the western side where the wind often will come down out of those and hit the lake. And when it does, it turns it into a nightmare. And you don't get just little choppy water that's going to rock your boat around a little bit. It turns into swells. And even if it comes off the north or the east, it's even worse because they're closer to the lake, and boy, they're really coming down. And it's a mess for fishermen, and we can see that. We know it's an issue for these guys, because you remember what most of these apostles did. Not all of them, but several of them were professional fishermen, and they fished this lake. They knew this lake. They knew what it could do. They knew its issues. And so, we understand Matthew, the tax collector, getting a little nervous. But James and John and these guys were on the water all the time, and they knew the issues, and they knew what was happening to them. So when you see their fear, you know it has to be something significant. The scripture tells us that their boat was actually filling with water. And there's a lot of irony here that Luke inserts into this story, and just the way he tells it, in that you have these professional fishermen who are completely at a loss as their boat's filling with water, and they're turning, and they turn to if he had a trade, he was a carpenter. And they turn to the carpenter and to the teacher, and they begin to wake him up and saying, Master, Master, we are about to die. And the way Luke paints this picture of Jesus' work here is quite incredible. Do you see the simplicity in the way he tells this story? In 24, the beginning part of 24, they are freaking out. They don't know which way is up. They think they're about to die. They're along with Paul, we felt we had received the sentence of death. And that's where they were. And so they go wake Jesus up. And watch how Luke describes this moment. He awoke. He rebuked. They ceased. And there was a calm. It's so simple, yet so profound. He woke up, looked around, said, knock it off, and everything calmed down. A man does this. Now, we read these stories and we think about these stories and we remember them maybe from when we were kids and the way they were taught to us if somebody was creative in it. But we often, I think, lose the sense of what's going on here. And the reality of the power and the magnitude of the picture that Luke is painting about Jesus in this moment. He's telling us who Jesus is. Like, it cannot be more clear to us as we sit here and read this. This guy, as they say, even the wind and the waves obey him. And they're asking, who is this? There shouldn't really be a question. If a guy can walk outside and tell the wind to knock it off and the waves to calm, you really don't have a question about who that guy is anymore. You know he has some kind of power and some kind of authority that exists beyond this earth and beyond this life. So then Jesus turns back to his men and looks back at his disciples and just simply says, where is your faith? Now, in some of the other gospel stories, he almost chastises his disciples and gives them a hard time. Here, he just looks at them and asks them a simple question. Guys, what are we doing? And you think, keep in mind all that they've seen Jesus do up until this point. He'd healed the sick, he'd cast out demons, he'd done all of this stuff. But this was a different scenario. This was a different set of circumstances because for the first time, they're seeing inanimate objects that do not have the ability to think or understand human speech and all this. They're responding to this man. So you can, in a sense, understand their questions if Jesus hadn't spent all his time telling them. The way Luke is writing this, he's asking them and he's asking us. The irony of how badly they are missing who Jesus is and the clarity with which he portrays Jesus as Lord over all creation, Luke is simply asking us, he's looking at us and saying, really, do you have any more questions? It should be simple and clear as to who this one is. The forces of nature respond to him. How much more should the creation who can recognize what he just did respond to him? Luke is screaming at us here that he is Lord. We ask the question, well, and maybe the disciples were asking this question. Who then? Well, they did ask the question. Who is this that the wind and the waves obey him? We actually know the answer to that question of why the wind and waves obey him. And I would say it's because they recognized his voice. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 3, the writer says, by faith we understand that the universe, all things, was created by the word of God. And John 1 told us that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That Word was Jesus. Colossians chapter 1:16 says, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. So why did the wind and the waves, these inanimate objects that can't think and can't recognize a person, yet they still at the voice of Jesus. Why? Because they know that voice. Because that voice is the one that brought them into existence. Because he is the Lord over all creation. This produces the first question that we must ask of ourselves, the first question of response. He is Lord. That's not the question. The question is not whether or not he is Lord or not. The question is, how will you respond to him? Will you respond with fear, wonder, and questions? Because that's where the disciples ended up in this moment. They respond with, in verse 25, he says, "Where is your faith?" And all they can come up with is they're afraid, they marvel, they wonder, they're amazed, which is natural. And they say to one another, "Who is this? That the wind and the waves would obey him." Who are we dealing with here? Now, this response leaves you in a semi-positive state. At least you're asking the question. At least you're wondering, who is this? You're intrigued, if you will, by him. It's better than the next state of affairs, that's for sure. But it's not the right state. Let's keep reading. Because the question looms and remains over this, where is your faith? You notice they can't demonstrate any faith at this point. There's no faith that has been demonstrated. He is Lord. Luke could not have been more clear, but the question remains, where is your faith? His past should have taught them not to fear. The issue was not that they turned to him in their fear. It was the fear itself, the type of that it was. And it was this that awoke Jesus too. One pastor said, the storm did not disturb the master, but the unbelief of his disciples did. You notice Jesus was sleeping through like a rock through the storm. That wasn't a problem. It wasn't until his disciples expressed their unbelief that caused him to wake up. They could have awoken him with a different plea. They could have cried, "Help." We are invited to cry help when we are in the storms of our life. It's the second part, the we are perishing part. You don't fear for your life when you're sailing with the author of life. You may wake him. You may plead with him. You may call to him, but you don't have to do it like that. You can go and say, "Lord, I'm afraid. Lord, I don't know which way is up." We're invited. That's one of the side pieces of this story, of just the invitation to bring our fears, to bring our angst, to bring our worries, to bring our concerns into him, to lay them before him and say, "Lord, we need you. We need your help." And we know that he can speak a word and calm all things. He's Lord over creation. But there's a second picture that we're going to see here, and that is he is the Lord over evil itself. Look at verse 26 with me. The story continues. They sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. This is on the eastern side of the Galilean Sea. And when Jesus had stepped out on land, there met him a man from the city who had demons. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he had not lived in a house, but among the tombs. And when he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him and said with a loud voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. Many a time it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the desert. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. And they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. But there was a large herd of pigs that was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him to let them enter these, so he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and drowned. And when the herdsmen saw what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. And the people went out to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed, in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it told them how the demon-possessed man had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding countries of the Gerasenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. Now, the land of the Gerasenes would have been a land that was opposite the Jewish land, and it probably would have been mixed. There were probably some Jews that lived there, definitely a lot of Gentiles that lived there. We know that because of the presence of pigs who were unclean animals to the Jews. So they would have, it was somewhat unnatural for them to even be over here on this side. And on the eastern side of the lake, it kind of slopes up a little bit, and then it turns up really sharp into these bluffs and cliffs. And the picture is the pigs and the herds are grazing right there along the sides. And when Jesus steps foot onto the land, he's met immediately by this man. Now, Luke doesn't say it out loud, but there's a good chance that this guy's running around naked. And he approaches Jesus and all the crowd and Jesus' apostles. Now, they've just come out of the storm, and all of a sudden they step foot on land. And I mean, the immediacy of it is kind of shocking. Like the minute Jesus puts his foot out on land, he's got this naked, crazy guy in his face, standing right there looking at him. Now, the apostles, I wonder as I read this story, did they just want to get back in the boat and just, nope, we're going back? Or was the storm enough that they were like, we need to be on dry ground for a little bit? We're not given that image. But you know that at least some of them were thinking about it, that whether we really want to get out of this boat right now. Now, Luke paints this picture of this guy, but he kind of does it in segments. In verse 27, you see he had worn no clothes. He had not lived in a house, but among the tombs. So he was cast outside of society. He existed outside of society. And then he comes back down in verse 29 and tells you kind of the details of how bad it was for this guy and how controlled he was by the demons that are inside of him. Because these demons had seized him, and even in certain times it had taken multiple people to bind him with chains and with shackles, trying to control this guy in the public setting, and he's broken them and fled again back into the desert. So he is possessed. Now, we don't talk a lot about demon possession in the Western world, okay? We just kind of leave that one alone and say, well, that's for the other parts of the world, and we don't really have that around here. I would disagree. I think it does still exist. We don't see the manifestations of it quite like this anymore in our part of the world, but we'll get there in a second. But there is parts of the world where this is still happening. This kind of stuff still goes on. It still exists, and it cannot be denied that there is evil that lurks in this world, and it affects people. And you can see the long-term effects. This guy had lost everything at this point. He was living amongst the graveyards. The picture is he is virtually dead. Dead to a life that is normal and with people and in society. They had absolute control. They exerted this chaos over this man, and they had complete power over his life and in his life. What's stunning about this story to me, though, is who actually recognizes in this story who Jesus is. Did you catch that? Because we've seen this throughout the gospel to this point. Luke chapter 4, when the devil comes to tempt Jesus in the temptation accounts, he says, if you're the Son of God, which Jesus didn't really claim that. The devil just came and said, if you're really him, command the stone to become bread. That's the first temptation. The third temptation in Luke says he took him to Jerusalem, set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, if you are the Son of God. He replays it again, asserting that the recognition is there that this is who he is claiming to be, that he is coming as the Son of God. That's who he is. And then probably the more profound one is in Luke 4, in verse 33, when Jesus heals another man with an unclean demon. It says the demon cried out with a loud voice. He says, what have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? This is the demon speaking. I know who you are, the Holy One of God. Do you see what the picture that Luke is painting here? The disciples just asked the question, who is this man? And Luke is telling us, he's reminding us here, listen, everybody in the other world, in the spiritual world, they know exactly who he is. He is Lord. He is the Son of God. I know exactly who you are. These demons are not without power. They're not without some level of authority. We can see how they've ruined this man's life. But when they get into this conversation with Jesus, they react a lot like the demons from Luke 4, the singular demon from Luke 4. And we can see that they ask him the question in verse 28, what have you to do with us? It's just like Luke 4. Jesus, Son of the Most High God, I beg you, do not torment me. Now, what do you notice when you read through that immediately? They recognize immediately that Jesus has power over them. There's no question of who's in control in this moment. None. Not even from the demons. They say, please don't torment us. What have you to do with us? Why are you here? Leave us alone. We don't want any part of you. And we see why they're responding and why they're speaking in verse 29, because Jesus had commanded the unclean demon. Jesus was literally doing exactly what he said he would do. Remember, he said he came to set the captive free. This man was held captive literally by these demons. And we see them try to get a little evasive with Jesus in verse 30. Either evasive or they're trying to overwhelm him maybe. And when Jesus asks what is their name, the name's not really Legion. The name he gives of Legion, he's saying, look, there's a lot of us here. So numbers-wise, Jesus is in a mismatch here. Power-wise, everybody knows who's going to win, even the demons themselves. They know they're subject to his authority because he is the Son of God. He doesn't just recognize Jesus immediately, these demons. They immediately acknowledge his superiority and his authority. The demons get it. The sovereign, pre-existent Son of God has power over all the forces of evil. The demons are preaching the position of Jesus here, that he is the Son of the Most High God, that he is Lord even over us. He is outnumbered in this moment, but not outmatched. And most of us have one of a couple of different mindsets towards evil and demonic forces. We either ignore it, and to you, if you're one of those who ignore it, I would warn you saying, listen, you may not see demon possession in a person. But one writer said, anything that is degrading or animalizing, like this man had been degraded, anything that lowers our functionality and our capacity to think as humans is in line with Satan's plan. Anything, be it an attitude, a habit, an addiction, a sexual practice, or a mental preoccupation, any of it. You may not be a legion, but you might be lazy. You may not be possessed by evil itself, but you're possessed by a love of many things, distraction, pleasure, the list goes on. So yeah, I would say the devil doesn't have to use his demons. He's got plenty of distractions in this world that we run to and grab onto and latch onto and get the same result. Some of us ignore, don't see the danger. Others overreact, see everything as evil and give the devil more power than he actually has. Do not miss in these moments that he has limits on what he can do. He is subject to authority. He is under authority. So yes, acknowledge that evil is real, but trust that his sovereignty has not changed and will not change. But again, that raises the question, do you actually trust? Do you actually recognize that he is Lord? Because not everyone responds to Jesus in the same way. Even after seeing an incredible miracle of this man set right, this captive set free, the question still looms. How will you respond to this Lord? And we see in this case, some respond with fear and rejection. You see it in verse 34 down through verse 37. The herdsmen see what goes on. They see the pigs go and drown themselves in the sea. And they immediately run to town and begin to tell everybody what has happened. And everybody comes flooding out. And when they come out, Luke paints this picture You've got this guy who the last time they saw him, he might have been breaking chains, running away naked into the tombs again. And now he's clothed, sitting at the feet of Jesus. He's visibly and demonstrably changed. He looks different. They can tell he's in effect sane again. He's been freed. And yet their response to that moment is fear and rejection. Do you see it in verse 36? They come in verse 35. They see him sitting at the right feet of Jesus and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And then people told them what had happened. In verse 36, they tell them the story of this man being set free. And their response was, Jesus, you need to go away. We don't want you here anymore. We don't want your presence. Now, some try to explain this away as, well, it was an economic thing, and no doubt whoever owned the herd of pigs probably didn't want Jesus hanging around anymore. That was probably a hit to the bank account. But others, and the way Luke describes it, it really wasn't even the pigs that made them respond to Jesus. It was they looked and they saw the guy who was Legion sitting in his right mind, and they said, we don't know what's going on here, but we don't want any part of it. And they push him away. They wanted nothing to do with that kind of power, and I pray that is not you here today. Seeing his power and deliverance of a man is not a cause for rejection, but a plea for embracing him. They weren't rejecting him just because of what he did to the pigs. They rejected him because they were afraid of the power that he held. It was the transformation of the demon-possessed man that they saw and heard about and responded to. And listen, your reasons for rejecting him may not be because of the power that he has, but the end result is the same thing. You may have other reasons, but they leave you in the same position, condemned. They leave you in the tombs. They leave you in the grave. When you push away Jesus for whatever reason, it doesn't matter the reason. When you push him away, you are left in the tombs. And Jesus will leave you alone. You ask Jesus to leave you alone, he will do it. And the scary thing is, there will come a day when he will leave you alone for good. So you may be walking along and saying, you know what, I don't want any part of that right now. I don't want any part of that. That's for later. That's when my kids get older. I'll do that when I take my kids to church. I'll do this. I'll do that. I'm about to go to college. I don't want any part of that right now. I'm going to go do what I want to do. I'm going to live my life. I'm going to enjoy my life. Listen, you push away Jesus long enough, he will leave you alone. And he will leave you in the tombs. Because you can see what Jesus does here. He gets back in the boat and he leaves. I pray to the Lord that is not you today. I pray that you have not pushed him away, that you would not continue to maybe push him away. One writer said, far more people than we imagine turn their backs on Christ or ask him to go away because they simply fear he will disrupt their lives. And it's a well-placed fear because that's exactly what he's going to do. But he will disrupt your life for the good and for his glory. So I pray that you would not run away from him in fear and rejection, because there is one more response to note in this story. In asking the question, how will you respond to the Lord? You cannot miss the last two verses. Because will you respond to this Lord with faith and worship and obedience? Because there's one guy in this story who gets it. Only one. The disciples, they're missing in this story. We don't know what they're doing. They're still asking questions about who is this guy from the boat. The town, they've already made up their minds. They're done with him. But there's one guy in this story. Look at verse 38. The man from whom the demons had gone. He begged that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, return to your home and declare how much God has done for you. And he went away, proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. In actuality, what we see here is the same response that Mary Magdalene had. Remember when we studied a couple weeks ago, all those women who were following along with Jesus, and it mentions Mary Magdalene, from whom Jesus had cast 7 demons out? Remember her? And remember, somehow along the way, she attached herself to Jesus and said, I'm not leaving. And this guy felt the same thing. He cast out a legion of demons out of him, enough to send a herd of 2,000 plus pigs, one gospel tells us, into the sea. And he cast all of these out of this man. And the man wants to do the same thing that Mary did and attach themselves to Jesus. It's a natural response. When Jesus sets you free, you attach yourself to Jesus. You don't want to be far from Jesus. You want to stay with Jesus. And yet to this one, Jesus gives a slightly different set of instructions. Mary got to follow him around. But not everybody is called to follow Jesus around 24/7. We're called to follow him, but maybe not pick up their lives. Some of people are told to stay home. Go back into your world. Live your life. And tell the people what the Lord has done for you. You notice how Jesus says it in verse 39, by the way? Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you. And do you notice the way Luke writes the story about what the guy actually did? Return home and tell people how much God has done for you. And he went away, proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. That's Luke taking one last stab at saying, not only is the Son of God, he is the Son of God, he is God himself. He's trying to push into your life, Luke is, and tell you, say, listen, he is Lord over creation, he is Lord over evil, and he should be Lord over you because he is the Son of God himself. So don't run away in fear and rejection. Would you respond to him with faith, with worship, with obedience? You realize these people that he goes to tell, they already knew the story. They asked Jesus to leave because of the story. And yet this man turns around and spends his life, the picture is he spends his life telling people, hey, do you remember me? Do you recognize me? You know this face? And people are looking and saying, we know more about you than we wanted to know. And yet there he was, sane and clothed and working a job and telling people, all because of Jesus. Fear is gone, faith replaces it. Rejection is gone, questions is gone, worship replaces it. Obedience becomes the function of our life. When Jesus has set us free, faith and worship and obedience becomes the priority.